all live here, and welcome everyone. We are continuing our journey through this season of Advent. We're going to look today at the actual Nativity Story. And as I said in the email that I sent out, I find myself this year focusing on the innkeeper. And I'll flesh that out as we get into the discussion, but I'm sure it's related to where we are, where everything is these days. So without further ado, let us listen to this story that we probably all know just about by heart.
Luke 2. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. And in the same region there were shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with fear. And the angel said to them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of a great joy that will be for all the people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased." When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." And they went with haste, and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, as it had been told them.
All righty. I realized we didn't begin with the word of prayer, so why don't we do that? I'll make the prayer retroactive. Holy One, let us enter into your presence now, that we might be filled with the blessings of the Emmanuel child, that we might know the mystery of your love a little more fully, even as we know that it cannot be fully grasped. For truly we do not know how you came to dwell among us, full of wisdom and grace and truth. But we know that you are indeed with us, and that you are waiting even now to lead us and guide us and shepherd us. And for that we give you thanks. Amen. Well, I have to say, I try to be progressive and open-minded and understand that things should change and Bible translations get better because certain words we understand better. So, for example, there's a passage in the Hebrew scriptures that I have to go back. It's either Kings or Chronicles, where this king gets assassinated. And we never really could understand why this king died, because the Hebrew word was obscure. In fact, if you look at the bottom of Bible translations where there are notations in the text, and it'll say the meaning of this Hebrew word is obscure. In other words, they just don't know what it means. And so in this particular passage, there was an obscure word. They didn't know what it was until they found another ancient document that used the same word in a context that allowed them to know what the meaning was. And so what we now know is that this king was run through with a sword as he was sitting in his palace outhouse. And there are moments like that, and there are other words that change. So, for example, those of you who grew up with the King James version of the Bible know that 1 Corinthians 13 is faith, hope, and charity abide these three. Mm-hmm. Well, we now know that charity then had a different meaning than it does today. Well, I'm of the same mindset when it comes to the Christmas story. I have to use on Christmas Eve the Revised Standard. What we have here is the English Standard Version. So, for example, where it says in verse 3, and all went to be registered. I can't say that. It's all went to be enrolled. And also sore afraid. Yes. Yeah, sore afraid. Which verse is that, Leslie? Oh, and then verse 9, and they were filled with great fear, and it should be in. Now, I'd have to go back and check if that's the Revised Standard, or that might be the King James Version. I think that's King James. Yeah, they were sore afraid. Yeah. And
that's the old Revised Version.
Yes.
I feel like,
oh, there's a new Revised Version, and I don't like that at all.
I'm pretty sure that although I guess my father could have just put it in there.
Growing up as the daughter of a pastor, yes, absolutely. The other thing is verse 10. And the angel said to them, "Fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy." Tidings of great joy. Yeah, exactly. You know. But on the other hand, I say to myself, I don't want to be like the guy who came out of church one Sunday and was criticizing the minister for a new translation of the Bible. And he said, "I don't understand what's wrong with the King James Version of the Bible. If it was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for me." But anyways, you know, there's all kinds of...
I have a theory that when you're a church kid,
yeah,
and you read some of these and you say like the hymns and they weep in the dies and the vows, that when you get to high school and you study Shakespeare, I think you understand it better.
Interesting.
That don't, because you're already used to
okay, so
oh, there's different ways to say things in English,
so,
and it's all English, but old stuff is different.
So the old King James has a benefit in terms of, as you say, being in high school and understanding Shakespeare a little better.
Like some of the, like they updated them in the hymn that we have here, but like when I was young, like there's still lots of vows and dies.
Oh yes, yeah. And I always would tell, I'll be right with you. I would always tell our student ministers that, particularly with Christmas carols, okay, you can change the words to make them more inclusive. Just don't mess with the first verse. Because the first verse is the one that everybody has memorized, okay? And I got it a week ago Sunday. Or was it? No, this past Sunday. Good Christian Friends. But interesting, it's interesting, somebody came out and the person said, "I see you changed the title of the hymn." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "It caught me off guard, but as I thought about it, it makes more sense. it includes all of us rather than just the men. And this was a man who was saying this, and they do the words of scripture, they don't change, but they get updated in terms of our understanding of ancient languages and whatnot. When it comes to hymns, they get changed too. So do you know what the original words were to Amazing Grace? What John Newton, was it Newton? I know it was Newton, he wrote it. I'll have to go back and do it. But the original words were not that saved a wretch like me. The original words were that saved a worm like me. Yeah. Yes, Don, I didn't mean to put you off there.
In what you just referenced.
Yeah. By the way, I'm going to say when we comment, we can take our masks off. It'll help me too.
Willie Nelson wrote a song, and he named it "Stupid."
Stupid?
Except that it became "Crazy."
Oh, really?
Yes.
Willie
When
Nelson's
he
song
wrote
"Crazy"
that,
was originally "Stupid."
Yes, the original name of it was "Stupid," so they do change things.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I just lost that.
Yeah, that's okay. But change. It's hard, but it can be good. One of the things that I've been fascinated by, and I think a lot of it is because people understand that COVID necessitated this change, is I haven't heard a single complaint about projecting the services. I haven't heard a single complaint. I'm sure that there are some people who aren't thrilled with it, but people understand it. And actually, if anything, I've heard a lot of people say, I really like it. I'm looking up, and that feels more worshipful, and I feel more connected to the people around me rather than having my face buried in a hymnal or a bulletin. But I'm not naive. I know that there are some people that they're just going along with it grudgingly.
The two other thoughts that I had were, last night there was a playing of the 2019 Scottish Royal Orchestra of the Nutcracker and the Mouse Queen, which is the original story.
Well, wasn't the Mouse King?
Well, the Mouse Queen was in that also.
Oh,
and
I never knew that there was a Mouse Queen in the Nutcracker.
It's Hoff something or other who wrote the original story. I forget the name, but Stokowski never actually liked the ballet because it didn't give the whole story.
Sure.
It gave part of it without explaining why things happened. And my reference to it is, we were talking about language and how things change. This was done in Scotland. The narrator and the director, in their notes and comments, the language was very pleasant because it was their style of English, not what we do. And we're talking about how we phrase things differently. Depends on where it's been done in art also. The controversial one, as far as I'm concerned, which I love the controversy because I happen to believe it's correct, is the Lord's Prayer. I've mentioned it.
Lord's Prayer, there's some changes afoot in that too.
Yes, and I have a strong feeling on that, which I've mentioned to you, because there's a double negative in it. It's telling God, don't you do bad things to us, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
It should say, lead us not into temptation. Telling God, don't lead us into temptation. That to me is incorrect. And it should be, God, lead us away from temptation.
Or, so what you're referring to is the passage in the Lord's Prayer that says, lead us not into temptation, which suggests that God would deliberately lead us into a situation where we would be tempted. And you could make a theological argument supporting that, I suppose. But that passage always, or that phrase always bothered me. And now Pope Francis has a commission that's looking at that exact phrase. And there is some scholarly research that suggests that the original language and whatnot would suggest something more along the lines of maybe be with us in the hour of temptation. So, and that's look, one of the things that's been so difficult about COVID is that it has forced us into so many changes, and it's been very stressful for people. And so on the one hand, I can say, I try to be open to change. But on the other hand, I also say to myself, that's why we need what we have here on Sunday morning. You need something that's familiar, that's stable, that you can count on, that you can depend on when life just gets crazy. And that's one of the things about this story is, and I hadn't thought about it, but underneath it all, there's this message that no matter what's going on in life, and you can take each of the characters here and see how life was challenging and difficult for them. Mary and Joseph, poor, they're giving birth to their first son in a stable. The shepherds out in the fields trying to make a living. It's probably a lot of easier ways to make livings than being out in a field all night in cold weather. And underneath all of that, the message is there's something that you can depend on. Okay, there's something that is constant, that doesn't change. And now as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking maybe I'm going to redo my Christmas Eve meditation. But right now, I find myself thinking about the innkeeper. Yes, sure.
I never thought until I was looking at your question.
Okay.
How do you think of the innkeeper?
Yeah.
Were there any prophecies about? I know, the Messiah was going to be born, David or whatever it is. Was there anything saying that he would be born in a stable or some lowly place or anything?
Good question.
Just he would be born in this town.
Yep. So there are numbers of biblical prophecies concerning the birth of the Messiah. One is that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, which makes sense because it is the city of David, and we know that the Messiah had to be a descendant of David because of the covenant that God made with King David. We know that Isaiah says, behold, a virgin, or the original Greek could also mean a young woman of marriageable age, shall give birth. But there isn't anything that I can immediately think of that says that the Messiah, was going to be born in a stable or a place that was rustic or poor, or however you want to look at it. So, interestingly enough, on the other end of the ministry of Jesus, you have that passage in Isaiah known as the suffering servant, where it eerily resembles the passion of Jesus on the cross, where, like a sheep, like a lamb that was led to the slaughter, so he opened not his mouth. He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, and upon him was the chastisement that makes us whole. But nothing that I can think of about the actual location where Jesus was born. Yes, Don?
The lectionary readings you gave us were Luke 1 and Old Testament.
Yes.
Mostly, but I did go forward and read this,
yes,
as a matter of fact. And I noticed that your comment on thinking about the innkeeper, there were only 10 words that referenced the inn in the entire thing. And the reference is just because it was a reason why for the state, just because there was no room in the inn. There was nothing else on the innkeeper or anything about it, but we have extracted the story from those words to be quite a significant part. When we put the pageant on, we have the inn there, and we go through the process, through the inn, to the stable. So the explanation is a very important part from those 10 words, which is where you're going in that.
Yep, so if you look at verse 7, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room, no place for them in the inn. Excuse me. Doesn't mention anything about an innkeeper. There is never an innkeeper mentioned. And I think I asked in the discussion questions, if you had to choose one word to describe the innkeeper, what would that one word be? What is it? Non-existent. Well, but
I mean, if literally, in Skipple, everyone was taken, we had people sleeping in common areas on board. Like,
yeah,
it's actually pretty nice to say,
Yeah.
there's no place for you here, but if you're desperate, there's nobody in the bar.
Mhm.
Bar.
Excuse me, a tickle in my throat. Yeah, so we can imagine the scenario. We can kind of connect the dots. But there is no innkeeper mentioned. Now, it makes sense that if there was an inn, there was an innkeeper. But he doesn't make an appearance in the story. Several years ago, on the Sunday after Christmas, I did a little, I'm not sure what the word is I'm trying to think of, but it was a little Christmas exam. And I tried to do something a little different on the Sunday after Christmas, partly to give myself a break, but also, people find it interesting. Like last year, we did the story behind some Christmas songs that we sang. And people find that engaging. Well, several years ago, I did this little trivia, and it was, so this is Christmas, ? And I asked a number of questions, and I gave multiple answers, or it was a multiple choice. And so, for example, how did Mary and Joseph get to Bethlehem?
Walk.
Well, we don't know. Donkey.
Donkey.
We just read the story. Is there any mention of the mode of transportation? No. Oh, but look at all the Christmas cards that I'd have to shred, that show a donkey either in the stable or Mary riding a donkey. And it could have been, but they could have walked. Okay. Pardon me?
We don't know.
That's right. Another question in the little trivia exam was, on what day was Jesus born?
We don't know that.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, it was most likely not December.
Spring.
And why do we know that it was most likely not December? There's a clue in this. Okay, and what about the shepherds that leads us to believe that it wasn't in December?
Well, they were out in the fields with their
sheep.
And that would have been winter.
So the shepherds would take their lambs out into the fields in the spring for the birthing season. Okay, they would not have had their lambs out in the middle of the night in the dead of winter. So there's a clue there. We know that the early Christians were very good at co-opting pagan rituals and traditions, and so they put Christmas right around the winter solstice to also counterbalance the darkness with the light. And I see a smile over here.
I was laughing because my mother and I were listening to my father from staying at in church on Christmas time. Anytime, you're ruining Christmas.
You can't tell people that it was. You can't tell people that it was. You got the date wrong. Yeah.
It was a political move that caused it to be there.
It was to co-opt pagan traditions, and yeah. And what year was Jesus born?
Oh, I think it was like 4 BC or something.
Somewhere to.
I just heard something about that.
Yep.
We did more research, and they found
So there's a
governors or something.
Okay. Yep.
Librarians,
Yep. So we know that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great. Okay, because remember, Matthew's gospel, Herod finds out about the baby and sends his soldiers to Bethlehem. Okay, so if we date our calendar according to the birth of Jesus, and Jesus was born in the year 1, basically. Okay. Impossible. Because we know from historical records that that Herod the Great died in 2 BC. So backing it up, Jesus had to have been born around 4 to 6 BC rather than 0.
Couldn't they have made that more accurate? Because wasn't that the first enrollment, and wasn't that a part of Roman record that was a decree for the first enrollment?
Yeah.
I would think they would be able to get that.
They would be able to date it. They would be able to date it by the Roman census for the tax purposes. Yep.
Do you know when did they decide, like, what year was year one?
It's a good question. I'd have to go back. There was a bishop, last name began with a U. Can't remember. But anyways, I think he was an Anglican bishop. And by using all of the scriptural records and everything, he determined that trying to think, was it the world? I think it was, he determined the actual day and time that the world was created. I forget, yeah, it was like, 5,324 BC on February 12th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something. It was that specific. But there is no innkeeper mentioned. And you think about it, there are a number of possible scenarios if you really dig into it. Just as Mary could have walked and Joseph could have walked, or she could have ridden on a donkey, there's a possibility, and let me back up for just a second. If we were to ask people in general who have not taken this Bible study and are not enlightened as we are, if we were to ask people in general, what word comes to mind when you think about the innkeeper in Bethlehem? What words come to mind? Yeah, bad things. Yeah. Callous. Greedy. Yeah, how can you send her? Yeah. People would see him in negative terms. And there's no evidence in the passage to support that. Think about it. Mary and Joseph get to Bethlehem. It's crazy. And they start for the inn, and somebody says, oh, don't even bother, they're all full up. Okay. And so they never see the innkeeper. Or maybe they go knocking on the inn door, and one of the workers comes and says, sorry, no room for you. The boss is beside himself, go out to the stable. Or maybe they just didn't even think to go. They knew they didn't have any money. So maybe they just crashed in the stable without permission. We don't know. Go ahead, Don.
Considering putting it in today's context, because human nature is human nature, we still have that today, contrary to what people think. It's not the same, but it really is in all times.
Yep, and human nature does not change.
We're looking at poor people. Now we're looking at street people today. If somebody came to your house as a street person today, to your house, and knocked on your door and said, I need a place to sleep tonight. What are you going to say? And there's a lot of reaction to it. We don't want to touch the untouchables, all to the point of saying, well, let me see if I can help you find it. Yeah, there's all the dimensions. The same thing applies here. There's all the dimensions there.
Yep.
And it allows us to look at it in today when we look at the innkeeper as ourselves.
Yeah. And we see ourselves in the innkeeper. Exactly. And the other thought that ties into all of this is the angel says, in verse 14, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. And by the way, that's one of the changes that I actually like, because the word men really means people in general, humankind. So how do we get a little closer to peace on earth and goodwill to all?
By accepting all.
By accepting all. Okay.
When you go back to our Christian, if you will, people who came to this country because they wanted to get away from the oppression that they had, and then they set up their own strict rules, which was oppressive in some respects too. We got to a point in this country where greed and making a living was more important, and we defied our religion as a people by saying, "Oh, black people are no longer human beings."
Right.
And we
dehumanize people
yeah.
who are different. We dehumanize. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of truth in that. Although when you said by accepting everyone, I think I know what you mean. The first thought that went through my mind, though, is when you said it, I immediately thought of that little 5-year-old boy who was found in the woods down in Abington, originally from Merrimack, New Hampshire. What's Jacob or something, 5 years old, and he was abused by his parents, mother and boyfriend. And there was an article in the Boston Globe that talked about the extent of the abuse, and there was a child abuse expert who was interviewed, and she said that this went beyond abuse. This was torture. That's the exact word she said. This boy was tortured. And so when you said accept everyone, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, does he mean accept this mother and her boyfriend and what they did?
Oh, I think there's an important part to the word acceptance. In communion, it is open to all. We accept all.
Communion, everyone is welcome.
There's a condition on acceptance, and there's a perspective on acceptance that in each one of us. Doesn't change who we are when we accept someone. And we don't have to believe as they believe, but we can accept that they are, they exist, that they are. And that's the acceptance. And it's a very open acceptance that we exist.
Yeah.
And we are creatures of God.
Yeah.
We may go astray, but we still are.
Yeah. So, yes, go ahead, Leslie.
Another thing to consider is like, what do you mean by peace? We think, there's peace as in not fighting or war, but Christians think of peace as like that. No matter what's happening, you have
An inner peace.
Inner peace of Christ in you. So what
interesting.
does that mean? Which one? What do they think? Because in general, I think it would be the inner peace. Because
yeah. So I hadn't thought about that.
Obviously, there's a lot of war.
Yeah.
Those were declared in the heavens.
So when it says on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased, peace could signify world peace, or it could signify an inner peace.
That's when, it was through Jesus that we all were able to get the Holy Spirit, which is peace.
Yeah.
Who gets
So
that is the people with whom please.
So that's an interesting point of what is meant by peace there. Now there's some qualifying words after that. Okay. Peace among those. So that suggests to me that it could be inner peace, but it also extends beyond that because it's talking about among. So that suggests a peace between people. And it may not be on a global scale, although it could. And, with whom he is pleased. Does that mean no peace with those with whom God is not pleased?
Yeah.
Say again?
It's always, I think it's sort of like one of the great mysteries, like why some people believe and some won't, and some kids raised in the church and new Christian families are like, no, believe,
Yeah.
So it's always been like
Among those,
some people are chosen to believe in some art or
Well,
however it works and
Mhm.
whatever.
and that is a reflection.
And people that, like, I think people that don't believe, I don't think they have the same inner peace that
Yeah,
everyone sitting in this room has, especially when like TikTok or whatever. That's why they turn to
so
all sorts of things.
the reflection, yep, the ability to believe or not believe is another reflection of God's love, in that God does not mandate, God presents, and we have to decide to um, receive that blessing, or all of God's blessings. And some people, for various reasons, do not. I was reading another article in the Globe this morning that said that um, do you know what the largest, when it comes to churches, the largest one would be today?
The largest volume of people like church.
When it comes to faith and believing. Say again?
The Islam right now.
No, it's spiritual.
Oh, really?
The vast majority of people in this country now do not say they are religious. They see themselves as spiritual. In fact, funny how the dots are connecting here. There was, I don't know why this came out in an article that I was reading. Tom Brady was raised Catholic, but he says he sees himself as spiritual now. And, that is a rejection of organized religion. In some respects, we brought that on ourselves. And in some respects, it has been amplified over the last 4 years because of political events. And unfortunately, many younger people see all faith organizations as conservative, evangelical, anti-this, anti-that, and not accepting, which is why I've been saying over the last couple of years that we really need to do a better job of messaging that says, we're not like that. I'm not going to judge others. I'm just going to say that we're not like that. And, and that kind of brings us back to the, innkeeper. And for whatever reason, and I think there's a number of reasons, we right now in this society have gotten to the point where we automatically think the worst of each other. And, and that's why I was thinking about the innkeeper. Based upon no evidence at all, we see the innkeeper as greedy and callous and insensitive. Yes?
I think it's also based on a lifetime of Christmas pageants. I mean, it's always like every Christmas pageant, like the innkeeper, someone going, there's no room, and then they have like convince the innkeeper.
Yep. And Sunday. And, but it's interesting because I'm thinking of our Christmas pageant Sunday. Okay, and yes, we have Mary. But Sunday we have the pageant. Mary and Joseph will go and they'll knock on the door of the inn. In fact, if you look in very closely, right there, I don't know if that's going to show up or not, but you can see the inn there, the little white building. And by the way, we have a wonderful pageant, so come and join us. That I'll be right back.
It's funny when they go, the innkeeper really is helpful. He suggests, well, you can go there. He could have just signed it. And he actually was helpful.
Better to be somewhere with a roof over your head than out in the street.
All the negatives that he was referring to.
Rather than
So I
getting
had to turn the special effects on in the stable so you can see the glow of Jesus.
rather than giving the innkeeper a bad rap, what if we looked at it for a complete, from a whole different aspect of, what if the innkeeper had said, oh, well, gosh, your wife is pregnant, we can put you up in the presidential suite.
Yeah.
And in a way, that the innkeeper fulfills almost a vital role in the fact that it points to the extremely humble origin of Jesus.
So if I understand what you're saying, Tom, is that if the innkeeper said, I'll put you in the presidential suite,
Yes.
it kind of blows the whole understanding of who Jesus was. That
If he had been suddenly born in surrounded by luxury and riches,
right,
it
exactly.
would have changed the whole
Mhm.
story and the whole message.
So you're saying that the innkeeper, by sending Jesus to the stable, contributes to the reality as it really was.
That's right.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
There's a wonderful story that I just read recently in a news item, speaking of where a fellow in New York was going to a party,
Mm-hmm.
and he missed the express train, and he had to take this local.
Mm-hmm.
When he stopped and it stopped at a local station, for some reason he had to change trains so he could pick up
Okay.
the express.
Yeah.
He was practically in an abandoned station. He saw in the corner, he thought, oh, there's a rag, a shawl over there, and someone left a little child must have left a doll.
Oh, okay.
Well, basically, he looked at it, and the little foot of the doll began to move, and it was a baby boy
Oh,
who
wow.
was newborn. I mean, practically had just been born. Well, the story is that he was actually a trained social worker. He
Yep.
picked up the child and called rescue and took a real interest in the child. And the result was that he ended up adopting the little boy.
Oh, wow.
He and his partner adopted the child, and it showed a picture of the boy, who is now I think a freshman at either Harvard or Yale,
Harvard or Yale. Wow.
or something like.
My
or,
apologies.
very prestigious college.
I'm trying to.
But it was such a wonderful story about how the fact that he was late for a party and took the wrong train,
Mm-hmm.
and once he had picked up the child, and he thought there's going to be there's going to be a forever connection with this kid.
Yeah, apologize. I'm fiddling here because the it's not charging and it says I'm going to lose power. So
Oh.
hopefully that won't happen before the end of the class. But this is all great conversation about the. That did it. I think it did, or it sounded, but it doesn't look like it's going to see the little charging emblem. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. That did it, Leslie. It's all working now. So, this is all very helpful because it's stretching our minds to look at the innkeeper differently. And your point, Leslie, about how Christmas pageants have contributed to this misconception of the innkeeper. But as I was thinking about our pageant and the dialogue, the innkeeper actually comes across as having a heart, because Mary and Joseph come to him and say, please, kind sir, do you have not a place where, might give birth? And he says, the stable. And she says, thank you, kind sir. And he says, it is not what I would like to do. And, so it makes it a little bit of a difference of a spin. And so where I'm going with all of this is when it comes to peace on earth, maybe that will happen. We'll take a few steps forward or closer to it when we start in any given situation to look for the good in each other, to focus on the good in each other, and build upon the good in each other. And that's what's missing these days. And if you think about it, that's really the best gift we can give anyone and everyone this Christmas. So, alrighty, any other thoughts, comments?
Yeah, that voice when the instead of an English accent, he goes through the verses.
Yes.
I heard that voice on Channel 2 PBS.
The one
similar to that.
This morning, the one that I just played.
10 days ago, yeah.
No, but the one that I played this morning was the
Yeah.
same one as.
Yeah.
So they're lifting it from the same website that I am. It's the BibleGateway.com. Alrighty. So just as an FYI, we will not meet next week so that we can all kind of just come down the home stretch and maybe focus a little bit on the sacred, and we will meet the Wednesday after Christmas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. There we go. Thank you all.